The morning sun cast long shadows across Ramstein Air Base as Senior Airman Kestrel Blackbird. Voss adjusted her reflective sunglasses and checked her watch for the fourth time in 10 minutes. Gate duty. Again. The irony wasn't lost on her that someone who'd logged over 2,000 flight hours was now examining identification cards and directing lost spouses to the commissary. The other airmen called it punishment detail, but Kestrel had stopped caring about their whispers months ago. A black sedan approached the checkpoint, its windows tinted darker than regulation allowed. Kestrel stepped forward, her hand instinctively moving to her sidearm's grip. The vehicle slowed but didn't stop at the white line painted across the asphalt. Instead, it rolled forward another few feet, forcing her to step back. Amateur intimidation tactics. She'd seen worse in Kandahar. The driver's window descended with mechanical precision, revealing a man whose weathered face told stories of operations that would never appear in official reports. His eyes were the color of winter storms, and when they met hers, something shifted in the air between them. He wasn't wearing a uniform, but everything about his posture screamed military. Special operations, if she had to guess. Identification and purpose of visit, Kestrel said, her voice steady despite the strange intensity of his stare. The man studied her for a long moment, his gaze moving to the wings pinned above her left breast pocket, then to the Afghanistan service ribbon below them. His expression changed almost imperceptibly. "Commander Marcus Thorne, Naval Special Warfare Development Group," he said, producing credentials that made Kestrel's pulse quicken. "DEVGRU, SEAL Team 6. She examined the identification with professional thoroughness, nodding the security clearance levels that dwarfed her own. "Purpose of visit, sir." Classified briefing with Wing Command. Something about a pilot they're wasting on gate duty. The words hit like a physical blow. Kestrel's composure cracked for just a second before she rebuilt it, brick by brick. "Sir, I'll need to verify." "Airman Voss." Her name on his lips stopped her cold. "Tell me, what's a pilot with your record doing checking IDs instead of flying missions?" The question hung in the desert air like smoke from a distant fire. Around them, the base continued its morning routine, but something had fundamentally changed. Kestrel handed back his credentials, her mind racing. How did a SEAL commander know her record? More importantly, why did he care about a grounded pilot's assignment? "That's above my pay grade, sir," she replied, stepping back to allow his vehicle through. But Commander Thorne didn't drive forward. Instead, he opened his door and stepped onto the asphalt, his movements fluid despite what appeared to be old injuries favoring his left leg. Then he did something that stopped every conversation within a 50-yard radius. He saluted her. Not the casual acknowledgement junior enlisted received from passing officers. A full, crisp, parade ground salute that demanded attention and respect. Kestrel's training took over, and she returned it automatically, but her mind reeled. Around the checkpoint, heads turned and voices fell silent. Commander Thorne held the salute for exactly 3 seconds longer than protocol required. When he finally dropped his hand, his expression had shifted from professional courtesy to something that looked almost like reverence. "Some birds aren't meant for cages, Blackbird," he said quietly, using her call sign with a familiarity that suggested he knew far more about her than he should. "Even when the cage is made of good intentions and bad decisions." He returned to his vehicle without another word, leaving Kestrel standing at the gate with questions multiplying like storm clouds on the horizon. As the sedan disappeared toward the base's administrative complex, she realized that her carefully constructed routine had just been shattered by a man who apparently knew exactly who she was and what she'd done in the skis over Afghanistan. The radio on her shoulder crackled to life. "Voss, report to Wing Command immediately. Corporal Martinez will relieve you at the gate." Kestrel acknowledged the order, her voice steady even as her world tilted on its axis. She'd been waiting 8 months for someone to remember she was more than just another body to fill shifts. Now, apparently, someone had. The walk to Wing Command felt like a march toward either redemption or destruction. In her experience, they often looked remarkably similar from a distance. The morning heat was already building, promising another scorching day in the German countryside, but Kestrel barely noticed. Her mind was locked on the image of that salute, the weight of respect it carried, and the impossible knowledge behind Commander Thorne's storm-gray eyes. She'd learned long ago that in the military, nothing happened by accident. Every assignment, every meeting, every seemingly casual encounter served a purpose. The question that burned in her chest as she approached the command building wasn't whether she was walking into something bigger than gate duty. The question was whether she was ready for it. The doors to Wing Command loomed ahead, their polished surfaces reflecting her approach like a mirror. Somewhere beyond them, answers waited. But Kestrel had been in the military long enough to know that answers often came with a price, and the cost was rarely what you expected to pay. Her reflection in the glass doors showed a woman who'd traded the infinite freedom of flight for the crushing weight of rules and regulations. But maybe, just maybe, that trade was about to be reversed. Inside the building, air conditioning created an artificial atmosphere that felt nothing like the natural winds she'd once danced with at 30,000 feet. The corridors were lined with photographs of aircraft and personnel, a gallery of aviation history that included planes she'd flown and faces she'd known. Some of those faces belonged to friends who'd never made it home from their final missions. The secretary outside Wing Command barely looked up as Kestrel approached. "Colonel Harrison will see you immediately," she said, gesturing toward the inner office door. Kestrel straightened her uniform one final time, knowing that whatever waited on the other side of that door would either restore her wings or clip them permanently. In her pocket, her fingers found the small silver pin she carried everywhere, a memento from her first solo flight, back when the sky had been her home instead of her prison. She knocked twice and entered when commanded, stepping into a room where her future hung in the balance between a salute from a stranger and the bureaucracy that had grounded her for reasons that still made no sense 8 months later. The office smelled of coffee and responsibility, two aromas that had defined military leadership since someone first figured out how to organize chaos into something resembling order. Colonel Harrison sat behind a desk covered in classified folders, his expression unreadable. But there was something in his posture that suggested this meeting had been planned long before Commander Thorne's unexpected salute at the gate. "Senior Airman Voss," he said, not looking up from a file that she suspected contained more about her life than she remembered living. "Tell me, what do you know about Operation Nightfall?" The question sent ice water through her veins. Operation Nightfall wasn't supposed to exist, and if it did exist, it wasn't something discussed in administrative offices by anyone below flag rank. Yet here she was, being asked about it by a colonel who seemed to expect an answer. "Sir, I'm not familiar with that operation," she replied, falling back on the safe response she'd learned during her early intelligence briefings. Colonel Harrison finally looked up, and his eyes held the same weight she'd seen in Commander Thorne's gaze. "That's about to change," he said. The mission briefing that followed shattered every assumption Kestrel had made about her career, her grounding, and her future. Operation Nightfall wasn't just classified. It was the kind of operation that existed in the shadows between official military doctrine and plausible deniability. The kind that required pilots who could think independently, act decisively, and disappear without a trace if everything went sideways. The kind that required someone exactly like Blackbird Voss, whether the Air Force's personnel department understood it or not. As Colonel Harrison outlined the mission parameters, Kestrel realized that her 8 months at the gate hadn't been punishment at all. They'd been preparation, a way to keep her off the radar while something much larger took shape in the classified corridors of military planning. Commander Thorne's salute suddenly made perfect sense. He hadn't been acknowledging her past service. He'd been recognizing her future role in something that would either make her career or end it permanently. The choice, as it had always been in her life, came down to whether she was brave enough to trust her wings one more time. Outside the office windows, aircraft moved across the tarmac like chess pieces in a game whose rules she was only beginning to understand. Soon, she might be among them again, cutting through the sky toward objectives that existed only in the minds of strategists who played with the lives of warriors like pieces on a board. But for the first time in 8 months, the possibility of flight felt closer than the ground beneath her feet. The briefing continued, each detail adding weight to the realization that everything she thought she knew about her military career had been wrong. She wasn't a pilot who'd been grounded for mysterious reasons. She was an asset who'd been positioned exactly where she needed to be for a mission that required her specific combination of skills, experience, and expendability. As Colonel Harrison spoke about insertion points and extraction windows, Kestrel felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with dangerous flying. It was a feeling she'd missed more than she'd admitted, even to herself. The kind of rush that made everything else, the politics, the bureaucracy, the endless chain of command, fade into insignificance beside the pure clarity of aircraft and sky. "Questions, Airman?" Colonel Harrison asked, closing the classified folder with a finality that suggested the briefing was over and the real work was about to begin. Kestrel had dozens of questions, but only one that mattered. "When do I fly, sir?" The colonel's smile held approval and something that might have been sympathy. "Tomorrow, Blackbird. Tomorrow you remember what you were born to do." The mission aircraft sat on a restricted section of the flight line, its angular stealth configuration designed to slip through enemy radar like a whisper through silence. The F-22 Raptor represented everything Kestrel had dreamed of flying since her first day at the academy. Its twin engines capable of pushing her beyond the sound barrier into a realm where speed became a form of prayer and altitude offered communion with something larger than Earth. She'd flown combat missions in Afghanistan, but those had been in multi-role fighters designed for ground support and tactical strikes. This was different. This was a machine built for air superiority, for the kind of aerial warfare that separated pilots from aviators and legends from footnotes in operational reports. The crew chief who met her at the aircraft wore sergeant's stripes and the expression of someone who'd been briefed on the mission's classification level. "Ma'am, she's been configured for your specific mission profile," he said, running through the pre-flight checklist with professional efficiency. "Extended range tanks, electronic countermeasures package, and a payload that doesn't officially exist." Kestrel nodded, her hands already moving through the familiar ritual of aircraft inspection. Every pilot had their own routine, a series of checks and observations that built confidence through repetition. She developed hers during her first deployment, refining it through hundreds of missions until it became as automatic as breathing. The aircraft's surfaces were flawless, its stealth coating absorbing the afternoon sunlight like a predator's hide. This wasn't just a machine. It was a weapon system designed to project American air power into places where conventional forces couldn't operate. The thought of controlling such devastating capability sent a familiar thrill through her nervous system. As she completed her walk-around inspection, Kestrel became aware of eyes watching from across the flight line. Other pilots, ground crews, maintenance personnel, all of them wondering what kind of mission required an F-22 and a pilot who'd been relegated to gate duty for the better part of a year. She ignored their attention, focusing instead on the aircraft that represented her return to the element where she belonged. Tomorrow, she would discover whether 8 months on the ground had dulled her edge or simply given her time to sharpen it in ways she hadn't expected. The sun was setting over Ramstein, painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson that reminded her why she'd fallen in love with flying in the first place. Up there, above the politics and procedures, the sky offered a clarity that ground-based existence could never match. Soon she would be home again. The mission briefing at dawn brought weather reports, intelligence updates, and the kind of operational details that transformed abstract planning into concrete reality. Kestrel absorbed every piece of information, her mind automatically calculating flight paths, fuel consumption, and tactical options. This was what she'd trained for, what she'd been born to do. Commander Thorne appeared in the briefing room as she was reviewing her navigation charts, his presence commanding immediate attention from everyone present. He'd traded his civilian clothes for desert camouflage, and the addition of visible rank insignia transformed him from mysterious visitor to operational commander. "Final mission update," he announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to life-and-death decisions. "Intelligence confirms the target is active and defended. Electronic warfare signatures suggest surface-to-air missile systems and fighter patrols. This isn't a training exercise, people. Someone's going to shoot back." The words sent a familiar chill through Kestrel's bloodstream, the kind of cold clarity that came with real combat missions. She'd felt it over Afghanistan, that crystalline focus that filtered out everything except aircraft, enemy, and objective. It was a feeling she'd missed more than she'd realized. "Blackbird," Commander Thorne continued, using her call sign in front of the assembled personnel, "your job is to get in, deliver the package, and get out before anyone realizes we were there. Simple in concept, complex in execution." Kestrel nodded, her game face sliding into place like armor. "Understood, sir." But as the briefing continued, she began to understand that this mission was more than just another classified operation. The target, the timing, the specific selection of her as pilot, everything suggested a level of strategic importance that extended far beyond normal military operations. She was flying into something that would either validate her return to flight status or provide a convenient explanation for why a grounded pilot had been given one final chance to prove herself. Either way, she would finally discover what lay beyond the gate where she'd spent 8 months learning patience. The pre-flight ritual began before sunrise, a sequence of procedures that connected her to every pilot who'd ever prepared for a dangerous mission. Equipment checks, communications tests, weapons systems initialization, each step building toward the moment when she would trust her life to the marriage of human skill and mechanical precision. The F-22 responded to her touch like a thoroughbred recognizing its rider, systems coming online with the smooth efficiency of advanced technology guided by expert design. This was what she'd trained for during countless hours in simulators and training flights, but the real test would come when she pushed the aircraft beyond the safe boundaries of peacetime operations. As dawn broke over the German countryside, Kestrel Voss prepared to discover whether 8 months of forced inactivity had cost her the edge that made the difference between successful pilots and cautionary tailies. The mission ahead would demand everything she'd learned about flying, fighting, and surviving in hostile skis. The tower cleared her for takeoff, and she advanced the throttles with the steady pressure of someone who understood that great power demanded great responsibility. The F-22 gathered speed down the runway, its engines building toward the moment of transition from earthbound machine to airborne predator. Liftoff came with the familiar sensation of gravity releasing its hold, the aircraft rising into its natural element with the grace of something born to fly. Below, Ramstein Air Base fell away as she climbed toward cruising altitude, leaving behind the world of procedures and protocols for the pure clarity of sky and mission. This was what Commander Thorne had seen in her, what had prompted his unexpected salute at the gate. Not just a pilot following orders, but a warrior capable of independent thought and decisive action when the mission demanded both. As she settled into the rhythm of high-altitude flight, Kestrel began to understand that everything in her career had been preparation for what lay ahead. The mission clock was running, and somewhere beyond the horizon, Her target waited with its own plans for anyone foolish enough to challenge its defenses. She would discover soon enough whether her skills remained sharp enough to turn those plans into tactical miscalculations. Radio communication established her position with air traffic control, the calm professionalism of controllers who managed the sky like a three-dimensional chessboard where every piece had to move in perfect coordination. But soon, she would leave their protective oversight, entering airspace where mistakes carried consequences that extended far beyond missed approaches and go-around procedures. The F-22's heads-up display painted the world in symbols and numbers that transformed the complexity of supersonic flight into manageable information. Altitude, airspeed, heading, fuel state, all the variables that determined whether she would complete the mission or become another name on the wall of warriors who'd accepted risks that others couldn't even imagine. As she crossed into international airspace, Kestrel felt the familiar weight of command responsibility settling over her shoulders. She was alone up here, beyond the immediate reach of ground-based support, dependent on her own judgment and the aircraft's capabilities to handle whatever challenges emerged from the unknown. This was the real test of her return to flight status, not the simulator sessions or proficiency checks, but the moment when training met reality and theory, encountered the harsh physics of aerial warfare. The mission parameters were clear, but she knew from experience that enemy action had a way of making even the best plans irrelevant. The sky ahead held answers to questions she hadn't been allowed to ask for 8 months. Soon, she would discover whether those answers were worth the wait. Navigation waypoints clicked past with mechanical precision as she flew deeper into hostile territory, each mile carrying her further from the safety of friendly airspace into regions where her aircraft's stealth capabilities represented the thin line between mission success and catastrophic failure. The F-22's radar systems painted an electronic picture of the tactical environment, identifying potential threats with the cold efficiency of technology designed for warfare. Enemy fighter patrols appeared on her display as amber symbols moving in patterns that suggested routine operations rather than active search missions. They were flying older aircraft, their radar systems incapable of detecting her approach until she was close enough to engage with decisive advantage. But Kestrel knew that overconfidence had destroyed more pilots than enemy action, so she monitored their positions with the careful attention of someone who understood that tactical surprise was a resource that could only be spent once. The landscape below shifted from populated areas to desert terrain, the kind of empty country that provided cover for facilities that didn't appear on civilian maps. Her target lay somewhere in that wasteland, protected by defenses that existed specifically to prevent missions like the one she was flying. Radio silence maintained the illusion that she was alone in this airspace, but Kestrel knew that electronic warfare systems were tracking her approach with increasing precision as she closed on the objective. The mission's success would depend on reaching the target before those systems could coordinate an effective response. Surface-to-air missile sites appeared on her threat display as she overflew their detection range, their radar signatures creating invisible barriers that she navigated with the precision of someone threading a needle at 500 miles per hour. Each site represented crews of trained operators whose only job was to destroy aircraft exactly like hers. The target facility materialized through the heat shimmer of desert air, its angular structures and defensive perimeter matching the intelligence photographs she'd studied during mission planning. But photographs couldn't capture the sense of menace that radiated from the complex, the knowledge that whatever happened inside those buildings was important enough to kill for. Her weapons systems activated with lethal purpose as she approached the release point, guidance computers calculating the precise moment when her ordnance would achieve maximum effectiveness against the designated targets. This was the culmination of months of planning and preparation, the moment when strategy became action and theoretical became irreversible. The attack run required flying straight and level through the most dangerous section of enemy airspace, maintaining course and speed, while defensive systems tried to lock onto her aircraft with increasing desperation. Training had prepared her for this moment, but nothing could simulate the psychological pressure of knowing that one mistake would end everything. Weapon release came with the satisfying mechanical thunk of ordnance separating from pylons. The aircraft, suddenly lighter as guided munitions, began their terminal flight toward targets that had been hidden in the desert until someone decided they needed to be destroyed. The F-22 banked away from the target area as explosions bloomed in her mirrors, secondary detonations suggesting that the intelligence assessments had been accurate. Mission accomplished, but the most dangerous part lay ahead. Getting to the target had required stealth and precision. Getting home would demand speed and evasion as enemy forces converged on her flight path with orders to prevent her escape. The next few minutes would determine whether she became a successful pilot or a cautionary example of what happened when missions went wrong. Emergency power settings pushed the F-22 beyond its normal performance envelope as she climbed away from the target area, trading fuel for altitude and speed in the ancient calculus of aerial survival. Behind her, the facility burned with fires that would be visible from orbit, testament to the destructive capability of modern precision weapons. Enemy fighters appeared on her radar display, their flight paths converging toward her position with the determined precision of hunters who'd finally located their prey. They were flying interception courses that would bring them within weapons range in minutes, but their older aircraft lacked the speed to match her escape trajectory if she could maintain maximum performance. The race was on, thrust versus distance, technology versus determination, one pilot's skill against an entire air defense network that existed specifically to prevent escapes like the one she was attempting. Radio chatter filled the frequencies as enemy controllers tried to coordinate their response, but their communications revealed more about their tactical situation than they realized. Surface-to-air missiles launched from concealed positions as she crossed their engagement envelopes, white contrails reaching toward her like deadly fingers. The F-22's countermeasures deployed automatically, electronic jammers and chaff dispensers creating false targets that drew the weapons away from their intended victim. Each successful evasion carried her closer to friendly airspace, but fuel consumption at emergency power settings was transforming the mission from tactical challenge to logistical crisis. The mathematics of jet aviation were unforgiving. She could maintain this speed or she could reach home base, but not both. The decision came down to trust faith in her training, her aircraft, and the mission planners who'd calculated fuel margins with the precision of people whose lives depended on getting the numbers right. She maintained maximum power, betting everything on speed as the most reliable form of protection. Enemy fighters fell behind as their fuel states forced them to abandon pursuit, their older engines unable to maintain the chase at altitudes where the F-22 operated most efficiently. But new threats appeared on her scope as fresh interceptors launched from bases further along her escape route, forcing constant course corrections that consumed precious fuel. The international date line passed beneath her aircraft as she crossed into friendly airspace, but relief was premature. Enemy surface-to-air missiles had longer reach than most pilots realized, and her defensive systems continued to detect targeting radars trying to achieve lock-on from positions that shouldn't have been able to threaten aircraft at her altitude. Navigation systems confirmed her position relative to the aerial refueling tanker that represented her lifeline home, but reaching the rendezvous required flying through airspace where enemy fighters might still be operating. The mission was becoming a test of how many variables she could manage simultaneously while maintaining the focus necessary for precision flying. Fuel gauges showed consumption rates that made her stomach tighten with familiar anxiety. She'd experienced this before over Afghanistan, the gradual realization that mathematical calculations were being challenged by real-world conditions that didn't respect theoretical performance charts. But she'd made it home then, and she would make it home now. The tanker appeared on schedule at the predetermined coordinates, its crew already extending the refueling boom as she approached from below. The rendezvous required precise formation flying at altitude and airspeed that left no margin for error, but it represented the difference between successful completion and becoming a statistic. Fuel transfer proceeded with mechanical efficiency as she held position beneath the tanker's wing, the F-22's tanks filling with life-sustaining aviation fuel that would carry her back to Ramstein. The tanker crew's professionalism reminded her that she wasn't flying this mission alone, that success depended on coordination between multiple platforms and dozens of personnel. Disconnection from the tanker felt like severing an umbilical cord, returning her to independent flight with enough fuel to complete the journey home. But the mission wasn't over until she touched down at Ramstein, and experience had taught her that assuming safety before wheels on ground was the kind of mistake that destroyed otherwise successful operations. The remainder of the flight passed in the strange anticlimax that followed combat missions, adrenaline gradually fatting as routine navigation replaced tactical maneuvering. But her mind remained alert to the possibility of late-appearing threats, because enemies had a way of pursuing vengeance across international boundaries when their important facilities were reduced to smoking craters. Ramstein's approach control cleared her for straighten arrival, the familiar voices of German air traffic controllers providing welcome confirmation that she was indeed returning to friendly territory. The runway appeared through the cockpit canopy like a promise of safety after hours of flying through airspace where every radar return could represent a threat. Touchdown came with the solid thump of main gear contacting concrete, the F-22's weight transferring from wings to wheels as she rolled out on the runway that had become as familiar as her own neighborhood. Ground control directed her to the same restricted ramp area where the mission had begun, completing a circle that had transformed her from grounded gate guard to successful combat pilot. Engine shutdown procedures seemed almost anticlimactic after the intensity of the preceding hours, but Kestrel completed each checklist item with the methodical precision that had brought her home safely. The mission was accomplished, but its larger significance would only become clear during the debrief sessions that always followed classified operations. Crew chiefs swarmed over the aircraft as she climbed down from the cockpit, their practiced efficiency suggesting that F-22 combat missions weren't as unusual as she'd assumed. The maintenance team began immediate inspection of systems that had been pushed beyond peacetime limits, looking for stress damage that might compromise future operations. Commander Thorne waited at the debriefing facility, his expression revealing nothing about his assessment of the mission's outcome. But something in his posture suggested satisfaction, the controlled approval of someone whose plans had been validated by successful execution. The real evaluation would come during the classified discussion that would dissect every aspect of her performance. "How do you feel, Blackbird?" he asked as she approached the debriefing room. Kestrel considered the question, testing her emotional state against the complex demands of what she'd just experienced. "Like I remember why I became a pilot in the first place, sir." The debrief lasted 3 hours, covering every aspect of the mission from initial approach to final landing. Intelligence analysts wanted details about enemy defensive reactions. Maintenance personnel needed information about aircraft performance under combat conditions, and mission planners required data that would improve future operations. But the most important conversation came after the formal debriefing, when Commander Thorne invited her to join him for coffee at the base exchange. It was a casual setting that somehow made their discussion feel more significant than all the classified briefings that had preceded it. "Tell me about Afghanistan," he said, stirring sugar into his coffee with the methodical movements of someone who'd learned to find comfort in routine. Kestrel had been expecting this question since their first meeting at the gate, but she'd hoped to avoid discussing the incident that had ended her previous flying assignment. "Sir, the mission reports contain all the relevant details." "Mission reports don't explain why a pilot with your record ended up checking identification cards for 8 months," he replied. "Someone made a decision that didn't make sense to anyone who understood aviation. I'd like to know why." The story came out reluctantly, details she tried to forget about a mission that had gone wrong in ways that weren't reflected in official reports. An intelligence failure had sent her flight into a trap, and her decision to abort the attack had saved American lives while allowing enemy forces to escape. Technically correct, but politically inconvenient. They needed someone to blame, she concluded, surprised by how much the admission still hurt. "I was the flight leader, so the responsibility was mine." Commander Thorne nodded with the understanding of someone who'd navigated similar political minefields. "And now?" "Now I remember why I joined the Air Force," Kestrel said. "Not for the politics or the career advancement, but for missions like today, for the chance to make a difference when it matters." The commander's smile suggested that her answer had satisfied some test she hadn't realized she was taking. "That's what I told them when they asked whether you were ready for this assignment. Some pilots fly because they love the aircraft. Others fly because they understand what it means to serve something larger than themselves." As they finished their coffee, Kestrel began to understand that today's mission had been more than just another classified operation. It had been her audition for something larger, a demonstration that 8 months of forced inactivity hadn't dulled her edge or compromised her judgment. "What happens now, sir?" she asked. Commander Thorne's expression became serious, the look of someone about to share information that would change everything. "Now you learn about the unit you've been selected to join, and Blackbird." He used her call sign with the familiarity of someone who'd earned the right through shared understanding. "You're going to want to pack light. Where we're going, there won't be gates to guard." The assignment briefing that followed revealed an organization that existed in the classified spaces between official military units, operating under authorities that extended far beyond normal command structures. Elite pilots, special operations personnel, intelligence analysts, all working together on missions that couldn't be accomplished through conventional military channels. It was exactly the kind of assignment she dreamed of during her early career, before Afghanistan and the political aftermath that had grounded her for crimes that existed only in the minds of officers who'd never faced enemy fire. This was her second chance, an opportunity to prove that competence mattered more than administrative convenience. The unit's base of operations wasn't listed in any official directory, its personnel didn't appear on standard military rosters, and its missions were planned by people whose names were classified above her clearance level. But the aircraft were real, the targets were legitimate, and the stakes were high enough to justify the secrecy that surrounded every aspect of the operation. Her new squadron mates were pilots whose records read like summaries of modern aviation warfare, men and women who'd flown missions that would never be acknowledged publicly, but had shaped the outcome of conflicts around the globe. They accepted her with the professional courtesy that elite units extended to proven performers, but she sensed an evaluation period during which she would have to demonstrate that her skills matched her reputation. The first few weeks passed in a blur of mission planning, aircraft familiarization, and the kind of intensive training that separated special operations from regular military flying. Everything moved at a higher tempo, with greater precision, and under classification levels that made normal operational security seem casual by comparison. But it was during her third mission with the unit that Kestrel truly understood what she'd been selected to join. The target was a terrorist training facility hidden in mountainous terrain that conventional forces couldn't reach, defended by surface-to-air missiles that made direct attacks suicidal. The kind of target that required pilots who could improvise solutions to tactical problems that didn't have textbook answers. Her approach route took her through a canyon system that provided natural concealment, but demanded flying skills that pushed the limits of human reaction time. The F-22 responded to her inputs with the precision of a weapons system designed for exactly this kind of mission, its stealth characteristics allowing her to penetrate defenses that would have destroyed less sophisticated aircraft. The attack itself lasted less than 60 seconds, precision-guided munitions eliminating specific buildings while leaving surrounding structures untouched. But the extraction required flying an escape route that took her directly over enemy positions that were now fully alert and actively hunting for her aircraft. Surface-to-air missiles launched from concealed positions as she climbed out of the target area, their radar seekers trying to lock onto her aircraft's stealth signature. Electronic countermeasures and evasive maneuvering defeated the initial salvo, but more weapons were launching as enemy forces converged on her position. The next 30 minutes tested every aspect of her flying ability as she navigated through a three-dimensional battlefield where every radar return could represent a lethal threat. But her training held, her aircraft performed flawlessly, and she reached friendly airspace with mission accomplished and lessons learned about the true nature of modern aerial warfare. The debrief revealed that intelligence analysts had been monitoring terrorist communications during the attack, recording their confusion as their training facility disappeared in precisely targeted explosions that left no evidence of how the attack had been accomplished. The kind of psychological impact that extended far beyond the physical destruction of buildings and equipment. "That's why we exist," her squadron commander explained during the post-mission discussion. "To deliver effects that conventional forces can't achieve, in places they can't reach, against enemies who think they're safe from American military power." It was a mission statement that resonated with everything Kestrel had learned about military aviation. The idea that air power's greatest strength wasn't destructive capability, but the ability to project force across vast distances with surgical precision. She was finally part of an organization that understood how to use that capability effectively. The months that followed brought a succession of missions that tested every aspect of her professional development, from basic flying skills to strategic understanding of how tactical actions supported larger military objectives. Each operation added to her knowledge of modern warfare while reinforcing the importance of precision, timing, and absolute professionalism in the execution of classified missions. But it was during a routine mission briefing 6 months after joining the unit that she learned about the true significance of Commander Thorne's original salute at the gate. The mission involved supporting a SEAL team extraction in hostile territory, and the briefing materials included background information about the ground force commander. Commander Marcus Thorne, the same man who'd stopped to salute her at Ramstein's security checkpoint, had been leading a classified operation that required close air support from a pilot who could deliver precision strikes in proximity to friendly forces. He'd specifically requested her for the mission, based on what the briefing materials described as demonstrated competence under adverse conditions. The mission itself was a textbook example of air-ground cooperation, with her F-22 providing overwatch while the SEAL team completed their objective. But it was afterward, during the debrief, that Commander Thorne explained why he'd sought her out at the gate months earlier. "We'd been watching your record for 2 years," he said. "Afghanistan wasn't a black mark against you. It was proof that you could make the right decision when political pressure demanded the wrong one. That's the kind of judgment we need for the missions we fly." The revelation reframed everything she'd understood about her career, transforming what she'd seen as professional failure into validation of the principles that had guided her military service. The 8 months at the gate hadn't been punishment. They'd been preparation for an assignment that required pilots who understood that mission accomplishment was more important than career advancement. As her first year with the unit drew to a close, Kestrel began to understand that she'd found her place in the military structure, a role that utilized her skill while serving purposes that extended far beyond normal operational requirements. The kind of assignment that justified all the sacrifices that military service demanded. Her call sign had evolved during that year from simple designation to recognition of capabilities that extended beyond basic flying skills. Blackbird now represented someone who could penetrate enemy airspace undetected, deliver precise strikes against critical targets, and return with intelligence that shaped future operations. It was a reputation earned through successful missions rather than granted through administrative authority. The unit's annual evaluation included assessment criteria that didn't appear in standard Air Force regulations, measurements of tactical innovation, strategic thinking, and the kind of leadership that emerged naturally during crisis situations. But it was the informal feedback from fellow pilots that meant the most, acknowledgement from peers who understood exactly what each mission demanded and how difficult it was to execute them successfully. "You found your calling, Blackbird," her squadron commander said during the evaluation meeting. "Not everyone has the combination of technical skill and judgment that special operations requires. Those who do become the backbone of units like this one." The recognition felt different from traditional military advancement, based on demonstrated competence rather than bureaucratic navigation. She'd earned her place through missions that tested every aspect of her professional development, proving that the pilot who'd been relegated to gate duty was capable of operations that conventional forces couldn't attempt. But success in special operations came with responsibilities that extended beyond individual performance. Newer pilots arrived at the unit seeking mentorship from those who'd already proven themselves in classified missions, and Kestrel found herself teaching lessons that couldn't be found in official training manuals. "Flying the aircraft is the easy part," she told a newly assigned pilot during a pre-mission briefing. "Understanding when not to fly the mission is what separates good pilots from dead ones. Every operation has abort criteria, but recognizing when those criteria apply requires judgment that only comes through experience." The advice reflected hard-won wisdom from missions where political pressure had conflicted with tactical reality, situations where pilots had to choose between following orders and preserving the lives of personnel who depended on their judgment. It was a responsibility that couldn't be delegated to higher headquarters or resolved through standard operating procedures. Her third year with the unit brought command opportunities that reflected the organization's confidence in her abilities. Squadron-level leadership in special operations required skills that went beyond flying, encompassing mission planning, personnel management, and the kind of strategic thinking that connected individual operations to larger military objectives. The first mission she planned as flight leader involved coordinating multiple aircraft against a target complex that required simultaneous strikes to prevent enemy forces from escaping or destroying critical intelligence. The kind of operation that demanded precise timing and flawless execution from pilots who had to trust their leader's judgment absolutely. Success came from meticulous preparation and the willingness to abort if conditions didn't match the planned parameters, lessons she'd learned during her early career when missions went wrong because commanders were afraid to make difficult decisions. But when everything aligned properly, the unit could accomplish objectives that conventional forces wouldn't even attempt. "Leadership in special operations isn't about rank," Commander Thorne explained during a visit to the unit. "It's about earning the trust of people who risk their lives based on your decisions. That trust has to be rebuilt with every mission, because one mistake can destroy what takes years to develop." The observation resonated with everything Kestrel had learned about military aviation, where trust was the foundation of formations that operated in three-dimensional space at speeds that left no time for second-guessing. Pilots followed leaders who demonstrated competence through successful missions, not those who relied on positional authority to command respect. Her promotion to major came with assignment as deputy squadron commander, a position that involved representing the unit in planning meetings, where special operations capabilities were integrated with conventional military forces. It was her first exposure to the strategic level of warfare, where tactical successes were measured against political objectives that extended far beyond immediate military results. The perspective was sobering, revealing how operations that seemed successful from a pilot's viewpoint might fail to achieve the strategic effects that justified their costs. But it also highlighted the importance of special operations forces as tools that could accomplish objectives that conventional military power couldn't address effectively. During one particularly complex operation, her squadron provided close air support for a joint task force that included SEAL teams, Army Rangers, and intelligence personnel, whose mission involved capturing high-value targets in an urban environment. The kind of operation where precision mattered more than firepower, and where one mistake could result in civilian casualties that would undermine years of diplomatic progress. Her role involved coordinating airstrikes that neutralized specific threats while preserving the surrounding infrastructure, a task that required real-time assessment of tactical conditions that changed faster than mission planners could update their briefings. The kind of responsibility that separated special operations from conventional military flying. The mission succeeded because every member of the team understood their role in a larger plan that depended on precise execution and adaptive thinking when conditions didn't match expectations. But the debrief revealed lessons about modern warfare that couldn't be learned through training exercises or theoretical study. The enemy gets a vote, she reminded her pilots during the post-mission analysis. No plan survives contact with opposition forces who are trying to disrupt our operations. Success comes from maintaining mission focus while adapting to conditions that we didn't anticipate during planning. It was a lesson that applied to every aspect of military aviation, from basic formation flying to the most complex special operations missions. The willingness to think independently while maintaining team cohesion was what separated elite units from conventional forces that relied on standard procedures to handle unexpected situations. Her fourth year brought assignment as squadron commander, responsibility for 47 pilots and support personnel, whose missions shaped American foreign policy in regions that rarely appeared in public news reports. The kind of leadership position that required balancing operational requirements with the human factors that determined whether elite units maintained their effectiveness over time. Personnel management in special operations involved challenges that didn't exist in conventional military units, because the individuals selected for these assignments were accustomed to independence and self-direction that had to be channeled toward team objectives. Leading such people required earning their respect through demonstrated competence rather than relying on rank structure to enforce compliance. Your job isn't to control these pilots, her predecessor explained during the change of command briefing. It's to provide them with missions worthy of their skills and support that enables them to accomplish objectives that matter. Do that effectively, and they'll follow you anywhere. Fail at either requirement, and they'll find ways to request transfers to units that understand what special operations can accomplish. The advice proved accurate during her first months as commander, when several high-profile missions tested both the unit's capabilities and her ability to make decisions that balanced mission requirements with acceptable risk levels. The kind of leadership challenges that had no textbook solutions and couldn't be resolved through standard military procedures. Success came from remembering lessons learned during her early career, when good commanders had trusted her judgment while providing guidance that improved her performance without micromanaging her tactical decisions. The same approach worked with pilots who had proven themselves in combat operations that demanded independent thinking and precise execution. Her command philosophy emphasized mission accomplishment through individual excellence supported by team coordination. The idea that elite units succeeded because their members were capable of exceptional performance when properly led and equipped. It was an approach that resonated with pilots who understood that special operations demanded more than conventional military training could provide. The unit's reputation grew during her tenure as commander, with other special operations forces specifically requesting air support from her squadron when missions required capabilities that only elite pilots could provide. The kind of professional recognition that reflected years of successful operations and the trust that developed between units that had worked together under combat conditions. But the most meaningful recognition came from within the squadron itself, when pilots who could have requested assignments to any unit in the Air Force chose to extend their tour in order to continue flying missions that utilized their skills effectively. The kind of retention that indicated successful leadership in organizations where personnel had multiple career options. During her final year as squadron commander, Kestrel received orders for promotion to lieutenant colonel and assignment to the Pentagon, where her experience with special operations would inform policy decisions about how elite units should be employed in future conflicts. It was a career advancement that represented validation of her leadership abilities, but it also meant leaving the cockpit for staff position that dealt with aviation from an administrative perspective. The change of command ceremony was attended by representatives from every special operations unit that had worked with her squadron during her tenure as commander, a gathering that demonstrated the respect she'd earned from the broader community of elite military professionals. But it was the presence of Commander Thorne, now a full captain, that made the event personally meaningful. "Full circle," he said afterward, referring to their first meeting at the gate almost 6 years earlier. From checking identification cards to commanding the finest aviation unit in special operations, that salute was an investment in someone I knew would justify the confidence. The observation prompted reflection on how career paths in the military rarely followed predictable trajectories, especially for individuals whose capabilities didn't fit standard organizational structures. Her journey from gate duty to squadron command had required advocates who understood her potential and were willing to invest in developing it properly. Pentagon assignment brought exposure to the strategic level of military planning, where individual operations were evaluated as components of larger campaigns that might extend across multiple years and geographic regions. It was a perspective that explained why seemingly successful missions sometimes failed to achieve their intended strategic effects. Her role involved advising senior leadership about special operations capabilities and limitations, helping policymakers understand what elite units could accomplish and what objectives required different approaches. The kind of staff work that directly influenced how American military power was employed in regions where conventional forces couldn't operate effectively. The position also provided insight into the political factors that shaped military operations, revealing how tactical decisions were influenced by considerations that extended far beyond immediate battlefield conditions. It was an education in the complexity of modern warfare that couldn't be gained through operational experience alone. But it was during a classified briefing about emerging threats that she encountered information that would define the next phase of her career. Intelligence reports described adversary capabilities that posed challenges which existing military structures weren't organized to address effectively, situations that required new approaches to the integration of conventional and special operations forces. The briefing materials included recommendations for organizational changes that would create hybrid units combining the best aspects of conventional military capability with the flexibility and precision that special operations forces brought to complex missions. The kind of innovation that required leaders who understood both traditional military structure and the unique requirements of elite operations. Her assignment to lead the development of these new organizational concepts represented recognition of expertise gained through 6 years of special operations, flying, and command experience. But it also meant returning to operational assignments where theory would be tested against the harsh realities of modern warfare. The experimental unit she was tasked with developing combined pilots from multiple services with support personnel whose skills bridged conventional and special operations requirements. The kind of integration that demanded leadership approaches which hadn't been tested in existing military structures. Initial operations validated the concept while revealing challenges that could only be addressed through experience gained during actual missions. The unit's capabilities exceeded those of conventional forces, while maintaining the precision and flexibility that special operations demanded. But success required constant adjustment of procedures and tactics that weren't covered in existing doctrine. Her promotion to colonel came with permanent assignment as commander of the first operational unit based on the experimental model, responsibility for proving that hybrid organizations could address threats that existing military structures couldn't handle effectively. The kind of leadership challenge that would define how American military power evolved to meet future requirements. The assignment brought her back to flying status, commanding a unit where she could maintain pilot proficiency while providing leadership that drew on years of experience in both conventional and special operations environments. It was the culmination of a career path that had begun with checking identification cards at a security gate and evolved through stages that couldn't have been predicted when she first pinned on aviation wings. Her call sign had become legendary within the special operations community, representing someone who could accomplish missions that others considered impossible while maintaining the professionalism and integrity that elite units demanded from their leaders. Blackbird now appeared in classified mission reports as a standard for what special operations pilots should aspire to achieve. But it was during a routine visit to Ramstein Air Base that the full significance of her career journey became clear. The security gate where she'd once checked identification cards was now staffed by airmen who knew her reputation and requested permission to have their photographs taken with someone they considered a role model for military aviation excellence. "Ma'am, is it true you used to work gate duty here?" one of them asked during the impromptu photo session. Kestrel smiled, remembering the morning when Commander Thorne had stopped to salute someone he'd recognized as having potential that wasn't being utilized effectively. "For 8 months," she replied. "Best education in patience I ever received. Sometimes the most important thing about military service is understanding when to wait for the right opportunity." The young airman nodded with the serious expression of someone trying to absorb wisdom from an experienced leader. "How did you know when the right opportunity came along?" "Someone stopped to salute first," she said, glancing toward the road where a black sedan had once carried a SEAL commander who understood that leadership meant recognizing potential in unexpected places. "The rest was just remembering why I became a pilot in the first place." As she drove away from the gate, Kestrel reflected on the career path that had brought her from security duty to commanding one of the most elite aviation units in the American military. It had been a journey shaped by advocates who saw past administrative mistakes to recognize capabilities that conventional evaluation methods had missed. Her legacy would be measured not just in successful missions, but in the organizational innovations that would enable future generations of military aviators to achieve objectives that current doctrine couldn't address. The kind of contribution that extended beyond individual accomplishment to influence how American air power evolved to meet emerging challenges. The sky above Ramstein was clear and blue, the same endless canopy that had called to her since childhood dreams of flight. But now, she understood that mastering the sky meant more than just piloting aircraft with technical precision. It meant understanding how individual excellence served larger purposes and how leadership could transform potential into performance that exceeded what anyone thought possible. Her story had become part of the heritage that would inspire future aviators, proof that careers in military aviation could follow paths that led far beyond original expectations. From gate duty to Special Operations Command, she had demonstrated that competence combined with patience could overcome obstacles that seemed insurmountable to those who lacked either quality. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the flight line as she prepared for her next mission, another operation that would test the capabilities of the hybrid unit she'd been tasked with developing. But this time, she was flying not just as a pilot, but as a leader whose experience bridged multiple generations of military aviation evolution. Her aircraft waited on the ramp, its sleek profile representing the cutting edge of American aerospace technology, guided by the accumulated wisdom of pilots who understood that flying was ultimately about serving purposes larger than individual achievement. The mission ahead would add another chapter to a career that had already exceeded every goal she'd set as a young officer dreaming of making a difference through military service. As she completed her pre-flight inspection, Kestrel realized that the most important lesson of her career hadn't come from any training program or professional development course. It had come from a SEAL commander who understood that true leadership meant recognizing potential in people who had been overlooked by systems that valued conformity over competence. His salute at the gate had been more than just professional courtesy. It had been recognition of capabilities that would eventually serve American interests in ways that couldn't have been predicted by anyone focused only on immediate administrative requirements. The kind of vision that separated great leaders from those who simply managed existing resources effectively. Her final mission as both pilot and commander would test everything she'd learned about aviation, leadership, and the integration of individual skills with team objectives. But regardless of the outcome, she had already accomplished the most important goal of any military career, proving that excellence was possible for those willing to serve something larger than themselves. The sky called to her one more time, offering the infinite freedom that had first drawn her to aviation decades earlier. But now, she understood that true freedom came not from escaping earthbound limitations, but from using flight to serve purposes that justified the trust placed in those who commanded the ultimate high ground. Colonel Kestrel Blackbird Voss climbed into her cockpit for what might be her final operational mission, carrying with her the accumulated wisdom of a career that had proven that determination combined with competence could overcome any obstacle. The gate where her journey had restarted was visible in the distance, a reminder that every ending was also a beginning for those brave enough to salute first.